For decades, the world believed one thing was certain: Windows would always dominate personal computing. It was the operating system of offices, schools, gaming, PCs, and almost every home computer on Earth. Microsoft built an empire around Windows, and for a long time, nobody seriously questioned that dominance. But something unexpected has started happening in the tech world. Linux, once considered a niche operating system for programmers and hackers, has quietly evolved into one of the most powerful and flexible platforms ever created. And now, even people connected to Microsoft's legacy, including Bill Gates himself, are watching closely as Linux accomplishes something Windows struggled to fully achieve for years. The biggest surprise is not that Linux became popular among developers. That already happened long ago. The real shock is that Linux is beginning to win in areas where Windows once seemed untouchable. Performance, customization, privacy, AI infrastructure, cloud computing, security, and even gaming are shifting rapidly toward Linux. What started as a hobby project by Linus in 1991 has transformed into the backbone of the modern internet. Most of the servers powering websites, streaming platforms, stock exchanges, cloud systems, and supercomputers already run Linux. Android, the world's biggest mobile operating system, is built on the Linux kernel. The Steam Deck proved Linux gaming is no longer a joke. Even Microsoft itself now depends heavily on Linux behind the scenes. Imagine telling someone in the early 2000s that Microsoft would eventually integrate Linux into Windows itself. They would probably laugh. Yet today, Windows subsystem for Linux exists because Microsoft had no choice but to acknowledge how important Linux became for developers and enterprise users. That single decision revealed a massive shift in the technology landscape. Linux was no longer the outsider. It had become essential. What makes this story fascinating is how different the philosophies of Windows and Linux truly are. Windows was built around control, consistency, and commercial dominance. Linux was built around freedom, community collaboration, and transparency. For years, critics argued that Linux would never succeed on the desktop because it lacked polish and simplicity. They said normal users would never leave Windows. But over time, Windows started developing problems that frustrated millions of users around the world. Heavy system requirements, forced updates, increasing telemetry, advertising inside the operating system, subscription pushes, and growing hardware limitations made many users question whether Windows still served them the way it once did. Then Windows 11 arrived, and the controversy exploded even more. TPM requirements instantly blocked millions of perfectly capable computers from upgrading officially. Users with older hardware suddenly found themselves treated as obsolete. Many people felt abandoned. At the same time, Linux distributions were becoming easier, cleaner, faster, and more beginner-friendly than ever before. Distros like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Zorin, or Sanpop_OS started attracting ordinary users who simply wanted their computers to work without unnecessary restrictions. The irony is almost unbelievable. While Windows demanded newer hardware, Linux gave aging PCs a second life. Machines that struggled under Windows suddenly became fast and responsive again with lightweight Linux distributions. Schools, governments, and organizations began noticing this advantage. Instead of throwing away old computers, they could keep them running efficiently for years using Linux. This became especially important in developing countries and educational environments where hardware budgets are limited. Even Bill Gates has spoken multiple times over the years about the changing nature of computing. Although he no longer runs Microsoft directly, he remains deeply connected to the technology industry and closely observes global trends. Gates understands better than almost anyone how quickly technological dominance can change. He witnessed IBM lose control. He saw Apple rise again after near collapse. And now he is witnessing Linux becoming impossible to ignore. One area where Linux completely outperformed Windows is cloud computing. Companies like Amazon, Google, Meta, and countless startups rely heavily on Linux servers because they are efficient, customizable, and scalable. The modern cloud revolution would look entirely different without Linux. In fact, most of the internet people use every single day is powered by Linux somewhere behind the scenes. Microsoft recognized this reality when Azure began supporting Linux extensively. Today, a massive portion of Azure workloads run Linux-based systems. That fact alone would have sounded insane 20 years ago. The AI revolution pushed Linux even further ahead. Training large AI models requires enormous computational power, flexibility, and optimization. Linux became the default environment for AI researchers, data scientists, and machine learning engineers. Most AI frameworks are optimized for Linux first. NVIDIA's AI ecosystem works exceptionally well with Linux environments. Researchers prefer Linux because it offers deeper system control and better performance tuning. As artificial intelligence becomes the next major technological battlefield, Linux already holds a commanding position. Meanwhile, Windows still dominates consumer desktops overall, but cracks are starting to appear. Many power users feel Windows has become bloated over time. Some updates introduce bugs that break workflows or hurt performance. Others dislike the increasing integration of cloud services and advertisements inside the operating system. Linux communities took advantage of this frustration by creating polished alternatives focused on speed, privacy, and user freedom. Gaming was once considered Linux's weakest area. For years, gamers avoided Linux because many popular games and anti-cheat systems simply did not work. But Valve changed everything. The launch of Proton dramatically improved compatibility for Windows games on Linux. Suddenly, thousands of games became playable with minimal effort. Then came the Steam Deck, a Linux-powered handheld gaming device that shocked the gaming industry with its popularity. Valve proved that Linux gaming could become mainstream when done correctly. This achievement matters because gaming was one of the final barriers preventing many users from leaving Windows. If Linux can handle gaming effectively, then the average consumer has fewer reasons to remain locked into Microsoft's ecosystem. Developers are beginning to pay attention. Some studios are optimizing directly for Linux compatibility now because they see the growing demand. Another reason Linux is gaining momentum is privacy. In an age where data collection dominates the internet, many users want greater control over their systems. Linux distributions generally provide far more transparency than proprietary operating systems. Users can inspect source code, customize behavior, and avoid unwanted telemetry. Open source communities move quickly to fix vulnerabilities and improve security. Governments and cybersecurity experts often trust Linux environments for sensitive operations because of this transparency. The rise of Linux also reflects a broader cultural shift in technology. People are becoming more skeptical of giant corporations controlling every aspect of digital life. Subscription fatigue is growing. Users dislike feeling trapped inside ecosystems where hardware and software choices are restricted. Linux represents an alternative vision where users regain ownership of their machines. That philosophy resonates strongly with younger developers and tech enthusiasts. Interestingly, Microsoft itself has changed dramatically because of Linux's success. Years ago, Microsoft executives openly described Linux as a threat. Former CEO Steve Ballmer famously called Linux a cancer in the early 2000s. Today, Microsoft contributes to open source projects and even develops tools for Linux users. GitHub, owned by Microsoft, became one of the largest hubs for open source development in the world. The company adapted because resisting Linux entirely was no longer realistic. Bill Gates likely understands this transformation better than most observers. Technology history repeatedly shows that companies survive by adapting, not by clinging stubbornly to old strategies. Microsoft realized developers loved Linux environments. Instead of fighting endlessly, they integrated Linux functionality into Windows itself. That was both a strategic move and an acknowledgement of reality. The educational world also reveals Linux's growing influence. Universities teaching computer science, cybersecurity, AI, and software engineering often rely heavily on Linux systems. Students entering the technology workforce become comfortable with Linux early in their careers. Many developers eventually prefer Linux for productivity and programming tasks because of its flexibility and command line power. Even hardware manufacturers are becoming more Linux. Companies like Dell, Lenovo, and System76 now offer laptops with Linux pre-installed. This was rare years ago. Hardware compatibility has improved massively, making Linux installation easier for beginners. Desktop environments like KDE Plasma and GNOME now provide sleek, modern interfaces capable of competing visually with Windows and macOS. One fascinating aspect of Linux's rise is how decentralized its development model is. Unlike Windows, which depends entirely on Microsoft's decisions, Linux evolves through global collaboration. Thousands of contributors improve software, fix bugs, and innovate continuously. This creates a unique ecosystem where progress comes from communities rather than a single corporation. That collaborative structure helped Linux adapt quickly to changing technological trends. Linux also dominates the supercomputer world. Nearly every top supercomputer on Earth runs Linux because it provides unmatched performance and customization for scientific computing. Researchers simulating climate change, conducting medical breakthroughs, or exploring astrophysics rely on Linux infrastructure. This dominance reinforces Linux's reputation as the platform for serious computing tasks. The containerization revolution strengthened Linux even further. Technologies like Docker and Kubernetes became essential for modern software deployment, and Linux sits at the center of that ecosystem. Developers building scalable applications overwhelmingly prefer Linux servers because of stability and compatibility. Entire industries now depend on Linux-powered infrastructure without most consumers even realizing it. What Windows struggled to achieve was universal trust among advanced users. Windows became incredibly widespread, but many professionals still viewed it as restrictive compared to Linux. System administrators, cybersecurity analysts, AI researchers, cloud engineers, and developers often prefer Linux because it gives them deeper control. That professional preference gradually influences broader technology trends. Another important factor is cost. Linux distributions are generally free. This makes them highly attractive for schools, startups, governments, and users with limited budgets. Organizations can deploy Linux systems across thousands of machines without paying expensive licensing fees. In a world increasingly focused on efficiency and sustainability, that matters enormously. There is also the issue of repairability and longevity. Older Windows systems often become unusable after major updates or hardware requirements change. Linux extends hardware lifespans significantly. Enthusiasts regularly revive decade-old laptops using lightweight Linux distributions. This appeals strongly to environmentally conscious users who dislike unnecessary electronic waste. Some analysts believe the future of personal computing may become more platform-independent overall. Web apps, cloud services, and cross-platform development reduce dependence on any single operating system. In that environment, Linux gains an advantage because it adapts easily across devices and architectures. Whether running on servers, laptops, embedded systems, or handheld gaming devices, Linux scales remarkably well. Even though Windows remains dominant in many consumer markets, the perception of Linux has changed dramatically. It is no longer viewed merely as a hobbyist operating system. It has become a symbol of technological independence and innovation. Many people who switch to Linux describe feeling more connected to their computers because they regain control over customization and system behavior. Social media and YouTube also accelerated Linux's popularity. Tech creators began showcasing beautiful Linux desktops, gaming setups, productivity workflows, and performance benchmarks. Viewers discovered that modern Linux distributions looked nothing like the intimidating terminal-only systems they imagined years ago. This visibility helped break old stereotypes. At the same time, Windows faced increasing criticism whenever controversial updates appeared. Every time Microsoft introduced new advertisements, AI integrations, or account requirements, Linux communities saw spikes in interest. Users frustrated with corporate decisions started exploring alternatives more seriously. One of the most symbolic moments came when Microsoft announced official support for Linux within Windows through WSL. That move essentially confirmed Linux's importance in modern development. Developers wanted Linux tools so badly that Microsoft brought Linux directly into its own operating system. Few moments better illustrate how much the industry changed. Bill Gates may not publicly react dramatically to Linux's rise, but it is impossible to imagine he ignores it. Gates spent decades shaping the software industry around proprietary ecosystems and desktop dominance, seeing Linux evolve into the backbone of cloud computing AI infrastructure. And open-source innovation represents one of the most remarkable shifts in technology history. What Linux achieved that Windows struggled with was earning deep trust across multiple generations of developers and infrastructure engineers simultaneously. Linux became associated with openness, adaptability, and efficiency. Windows remained commercially powerful, but Linux became culturally influential among the people building the future of technology. The next decade could become even more interesting. AI, Edge computing, quantum research, and decentralized technologies may strengthen Linux further because open ecosystems encourage experimentation. Developers can modify Linux freely to support new architectures and work. That flexibility becomes critical during periods of rapid innovation. Consumer adoption may also continue rising as Linux distributions become easier for beginners. Gaming improvements remove another major obstacle. Better hardware compatibility simplifies installation. Modern interfaces reduce the learning curve. The more approachable Linux becomes, the harder it is to dismiss. Still, Windows will not disappear anytime soon. Microsoft remains one of the most powerful technology companies on Earth. Windows continues, dominating many business and consumer environments. But the narrative changed permanently. Linux is no longer the underdog nobody takes seriously. It became a legitimate force shaping the future of computing. Perhaps the most incredible part of this story is that Linux succeeded without traditional advertising campaigns or massive corporate marketing budgets for most of its history. Its growth came largely from communities, developers, enthusiasts, and organizations recognizing its advantages organically. That kind of growth is difficult to manufacture artificially. The rise of Linux proves something important about technology itself. The best ideas do not always win immediately. Sometimes they evolve quietly for decades before the world fully recognizes their value. Linux spent years improving steadily while many people ignored it. Now it powers the internet, dominates supercomputers, drives AI development, fuels cloud infrastructure, and challenges Windows in areas once thought impossible. And maybe that is the biggest reason this story matters so much. It shows that technology is never truly settled. Giants can be challenged. Open source communities can compete with trillion-dollar corporations. Innovation can emerge from unexpected places. Linux was once dismissed as a niche experiment. Today it stands as one of the greatest technological success stories ever created. As more users question closed ecosystems, hardware restrictions, privacy concerns, and software bloat, Linux continues gaining momentum. Developers trust it. Enterprises rely on it. Gamers are beginning to embrace it. Students learn on it. Researchers depend on it. Entire industries run on it. Whether Bill Gates feels admiration, surprise, or concern about Linux's achievements, one thing is undeniable. Linux pulled off what many believed impossible. It transformed from a small open-source project into a global technological foundation powerful enough to influence even Microsoft itself. And the most shocking part may be that this transformation is still only beginning.